India, shortly SFLC.in, welcome all the women and wish all of you a very happy Women's Day and welcome all of you to this panel discussion titled Building a Safety Net. In the modern world, the internet has taken the role of a public square where people from all walks of life come together to express themselves. Safe internet is essential for everybody, especially for those who live at the margins of the society. But with the growing incidence of online harassment and abuse, safety has been compromised in the digital world, making it difficult for women, particularly women from marginalized communities, to have equal participation in the digital world. Once promised to be an open space for women, the internet has become a tool of harassment instead. We are deeply disturbed by the systematic, synchronized capture of the new age public space that deters women and those at the margins of the society from freely expressing themselves. In our panel discussion today, we are hoping to understand the impacts of online harassment as well as find ways to fight back and reclaim the internet. And to go ahead with this, we have a distinguished set of experts with us today as panelists and a prolific moderator. But before we head with our panel discussion, I would like to give all of you a brief introduction of SFLC.in. SFLC.in is a digital rights organization based out of New Delhi, India. We fight for open, equal, secure, and free internet. SSLC.in takes immense pride in calling itself the defender of your digital freedom. Now, coming back to our panel discussion today, I am I would like to invite our moderator, Ms. Mishi Chaudhary. A brief introduction of Mishi Chaudhary. Mishi Chaudhary is the legal director of Software Freedom Law Center in New York. She is also a technology lawyer and an active online civil liberties activist. SFLC.in was founded by Mishi Chaudhary in 2010. Over to you, Mishi. Please go ahead with the panel discussion from here.
Thank you, everyone. Can you all hear me well? Um, Thank you, Maithili, for that introduction. I am a very happy International Women's Day. I think it's like all other days because every day we are women and every day is our day. But what I appreciate about this is that it's a call to think more about our identity as women and the boundaries we create or contest around the identity which we have. I'm very grateful to all of you. We have a stellar panel here to talk about something which is not very comfortable. I generally try to highlight quotes from books when I read, and I'm a very messy reader, so don't borrow books from me. But there is a lot of interesting stuff one learns just because one tends to remember through these highlights. There's a book called One Day We'll All Be Dead, and none of this will matter. Not to be fatalist, but this is a book by Sachi Kaul. And a quote which she states there, and it stuck with me, was that I like being present in spaces where I'm not welcome. I like being present in spaces where I'm not welcome because you do not deserve to feel comfortable just because you are racist or sexist or small minded. I think that happens to quite a lot of us. A 2018 Amnesty International report on online harassment in India showed that more vocal a woman was, the more likely she was to be targeted. The scale of this increased for women from religious minorities or disadvantaged castes. Harms done by aggressive, violent, misogynist, and racist speech are increasing in visibility around the world as the language of the street is amplified and then is also always recorded in the internet. We as individuals are drawn into the digital environments because they are increasingly felt as necessary to ordinary social existence, only to find ourselves treated as objects in a social theater of aggression and denigration. We often find ourselves at the receiving end of sustained abuse threats, and debasement, either on grounds of our actual or many a times perceived characteristics, or over our expression of particular ideas and convictions that stand at odds with those of others. The result can be as much as a form of censorship and silencing as internet is an opportunity for freedom and self-development through learning and expression. I think one of the most horrifying things which we've seen very recently, which started in July of 2021 last year, was a case which has seen some movement called Sulli Deals, an app hosted on GitHub, which posted photographs and personal information of some 100 Muslim women online. Thereafter, what we've also seen is it's not just one thing which happened, but another app, which is called Bully Bai app, where a similar thing happened again. And in both the times, despite the fact that there was a lot of awareness which was created by people, politicians as across party lines had to write. What we see is inaction or delayed action or a harassment again, and people are the victims are forced to live with that thing. In We have today with us people who have either been the victim of this or who have studied this topic pretty deeply. The good part of having panelists who have a very long resumes and achievements is that you don't have to introduce them. It is my great pleasure to have Vishaka Datta, Kavita Krishnan, and Ismat Ara here. Thank you, ladies, for joining us. You can read about all of these women online, and there would be a lot which will fill up. And I'm not going to spend our great time for this conversation introducing them. What I will say is that we are going to offer them 5 minutes each of an opening statement about their experiences and being women living online just as everybody does these days, and also what their view is about creating this safety net and why do we actually need the safety net. We'll start with that. Each of the panelists will speak for 5 minutes. I'm going to be a little strict so that we can actually get more discussion going. I will cut you off at 5 minutes, and thereafter I'll pose at least 2 to 3 questions to each of you so that you can give us some crisp answers. And at the end, if there are other audience questions, we'll take those or use that time to just go ahead and talk about various things. I'm going to start with you, Kavita. Um, um, I remember that in 2016, when SFLC.YN had put out this report on online harassment as a form of censorship, you had actually talked about very early on about an incident in 2013 about which was rape threats, actual rape threats which you were getting, and this was about something which was being hosted by Rediff, where the officials failed to notice the abusive behavior of the user. So this is to say that you have been experiencing this almost all through your internet life or online life. Tell us about what you think today, why this is
Yeah.
important, about the idea of creating the safety net, and how or what we can learn from your being online. Over to you.
Yeah. Well, I think in 2013 I was very new to online life. I didn't really have a public online presence before 2012-13, and so that first time that happened, it was quite a shock. But since then, I can say confidently that there's a barrage of these every day, and those include rape threats, comments on one's looks, the color of one's skin. You're not good looking enough to be rapeable, and how you should be raped by. So people who want to be both Islamophobic and misogynist. So they're attacking us for supporting the rights of minorities, and so they'll talk about Muslim men raping you, etc., etc. So it's a constant kind of background noise. And what I want to say is that I feel a little odd because I know that a lot of women I listen to often are a little mocking of anyone who takes any of this seriously. So there's both kinds of responses, you know. So there is one kind of response that says, you know, why aren't you going to the police and why aren't you complaining and all of that. And I feel like saying, well, there are so many of these that I can't possibly go to the police for each one. I'd be doing nothing else. But on the other hand, I also feel very uneasy when I find women who are also facing that and worse, basically saying, oh, you know, there's so much worse happening offline that we shouldn't be bothering about what's happening online. And I've always felt uncomfortable with that kind of, hierarchy of harm, because I feel as though for the individual who's facing the harm, um, that harm is quite real. And, much of our life in this last 2 years of the pandemic has been spent online, on screens, online, and much of your expression is online. And if the harassment is there, then you're asking for any woman who wants to be in this world, in the online sphere, to have extraordinary resilience in the face of all of this. And I don't think that that is possible for everyone, right? I think there are going to be times when we will be vulnerable. And speaking for myself, absolutely, you know, so there are points in the same month when I would be able to ignore it or able to laugh it off or able to simply make it public and, show people, okay, this is the kind of thing which, this is the way in which there's an organized harassment of women who are opposing India's Hindu majoritarian regime, there is this organized harassment. But there are other times in which you aren't in a position to do that, and you feel quite at a loss because there isn't any other way but to just step back from the social media altogether for some time. And I think that our conversations on these are extremely inadequate because, in a sense, I think that there is a widespread lack of recognition of what is being faced online as violence, as a form of violence. It is a kind of, it's like the what is it called in football, where you are heckling the opposition. So it's a kind of heckling that is going on. There's a particular word for it that's evading me right now. But there is that kind of an organized attempt to create noise so that you're not able to think quietly and calmly. And you are encouraged to feel, you are forced to feel under siege. So it's attempting to make you feel like that. It's a mind game, and it's a very violent mind game. Now, having said that, I'll also say that look, the kinds of online harm have now expanded exponentially, right? So, on the one hand, you have Muslim women facing these apps and all of that, which have used technology to basically, streamline these attacks and single out Muslim women journalists, etc., and Muslim women activists, and all of that. And apart from the apps, this kind of pages, there are pages on Facebook and all of that, which also do exactly this, right? So there's an entire ecosystem doing this. And then there's also a similar ecosystem that is just going after any vocal women who are against the regime and spreading fake news about them. I've also been at the receiving end of that. And then, of course, there's Pegasus. How can we not, so it's not just our online life, and it's not just, I think the word trolling is just such an inadequate statement for what is being witnessed. There is a certain intrusive, violent kind of attack on your very sense of self. And I know women who can't take this kind of thing, and therefore they do not allow themselves to be active on social media because they're not in a position to take it. Maybe for reasons that the violence they faced in their real lives are too much, and they cannot be triggered by this kind of thing all the time. And Pegasus is something which is where the government has weaponized your own smartphone, which is your private device, weaponized it, turned it into a spying device on your absolutely most intimate life, not just on what you're saying, speaking, but also what you're doing, all of that. It's actually spying on you in real time in a very, very intrusive way. So,
Kavita,
what is, yeah,
I'm gonna stop you
yeah.
here, but you have actually segued in a very interesting thing about um, when a cyber attack happens from those who are supposed to be protecting you. What does one actually do there? Turning your own private device into a weapon. Um, I am tempted to go to Vishakha, but she did tell me that she wants to be the last in that. Because why I'm saying is because Kavita said something which also struck me in this interview which Vishakha you gave for the same report I referred to about Kavita that time. And even at that time, you said that you believed it would be unreasonable to expect everybody to toughen up and cope well with mindless abuse, which is what Kavita rightly started with. That their reactions like, why are you taking it seriously when so much worse is happening in the world? And to the point of so much worse happening in the world, we will move to Ismat. And Ismat, who's been doing a great job of just being a journalist, reporting on stories and trying to bring justice in the world using words and telling those stories. Ismat, and and that also has resulted into horrifying experience for you. I read your very poignant, moving, but also quite scary notes about the experience which you wrote in January this year. Perhaps we will move on to you and your statement, please. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. First of all, thank you, Mishi, for such a beautiful introduction. My name is Ismat. I work with The Wire. I cover hate crimes. I cover politics. I cover communalism. And in the past few years, I think we would all agree that communalism has taken many shapes and many forms. And with the kind of reporting that I personally do, and also a lot of new web portal journalists, that have come up recently do. There's different categories of sort of risks that are become part of your everyday life. There is not just like one aspect to it. There's the physical danger of it. There's the fear that you might at any point there might be an FIR against you. There might be some sort of a threat from somebody. There might be some sort of a targeting because you are reporting on stories that perhaps people do not want you to talk about. So all of that is there. And for somebody who's entered journalism with a very with a very lofty sort of ambition, and now I feel very stupid about it because I find myself really like I find myself really confused about how I'm spending my energy. Like if we talk about what happened in January, so this January, when I woke up on the new year, I saw myself being auctioned on this app that was made with the purpose of shutting up Muslim women who were sort of prominent, who were vocal. There were actresses in it, there were politicians, there were activists, etc., etc. All of those women were there. So at that time when I thought that like at some point you have to tell yourself that you have to ask yourself what is that point where you will actually go ahead and take action against something. Very correctly, Ms. Kavita pointed out that you can't really spend all of your energy. You can't really expect somebody to spend all of their energy and resources into going and fighting cases, right? Because I personally, firsthand, I saw very recently how much energy it consumes and how difficult it gets to sort of cope with it. Now that I'm talking about it, like almost 2 months after it has happened, I think it's now I'm coming to terms with the fact that I did not stop at that time and feel the feelings that I was feeling. I did not really think about what I was going through. I was just in that mode where I had to, constantly do something about it, constantly create momentum, constantly write about it, constantly, be in touch with the police, be in touch with the lawyer, and all of that. And I think with that kind of urgency around something, it becomes very tricky for a young person to sort of, you become lost, you feel lost, because you come into a profession with certain ideas, with certain dreams, and then you end up sort of fighting these battles that you shouldn't have to, as Mishi said initially. And when on the first day when all of this happened, there was a friend of mine who told me exactly what Miss Kavita said right now. She said, Ismat, just let it go. You don't have to really do anything about it. And I felt a little angry at her at that point of time, but now that I think of it, I don't really blame her, because it's so regular. This kind of trolling, this kind of harassment and targeting has become so regular in the life of journalists and people who are active on, who are vocal on social media, that people that we don't really know what to do in the face of this kind of targeting. And the most difficult part here is to know when, like when is it out of line, when is it that I should really go ahead and file a case, when is it that it becomes serious. Because even in this case, a lot of people told me that, it's just digital, it's just happening online. But my fear was, and not just mine, my friends and people who care for me, my family, what their fear was that I have to, go to UP for the elections, and I've just returned from there. So their fear was that, what if I go there, and what if somebody has seen that image, floating around on the internet, and what if I get physically assaulted, so that the line between the physical danger and the digital sort of trolling is also very thin, and you never know when this kind of digital trolling will convert into like a physical assault. So yeah, I think I'm done with my
Yes,
5 minutes.
yes, you were right on time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can totally understand when online and offline converge this way, and everything actually um, drives each other, then how do you actually distinguish between what is happening on internet and when will it spill over? Vishaka, you had run a campaign long ago about equal online, about digital rights for women and gender minorities. You also have said that a lot of people, especially a number of sex workers who would normally be isolated in the general public, have found a voice on the internet. They obviously face a lot of considerable abuse online, yet are able to stand up for themselves to present their views. You heard what Kavita said and Ismat said. So over to you about what you think about this creating. Why are we forced to talk about creating a safety net everywhere we go?
Thanks, Mishi, and thank you for inviting me to this. I actually wanted to talk about our efforts to create a safety net very recently and the kind of online harassment that resulted in, right? So, over the last month, we've been launching in steps a helpline that we've started at Point of View, which is the nonprofit that I run. And it's a helpline that is aimed at women, queer, trans, non binary people, and tries to provide them information and guidance to deal with digital harassment, abuse, etc., the kind of things that both Kavita and Ismat talked about, as well as so many other forms, right? Because digital or online harassment is now like an umbrella term. And there are so many different things in it, from like blank calls every day to the cyber troops that are sort of, fueling this kind of organized violence. The really shocking thing, actually, which we've been still experiencing, is that when we launched the helpline, even though the messaging was very, very clearly aimed at women and said, okay, if you're experiencing this kind of problem, call this phone number. Immediately, every single day, we started receiving calls from about 50 men, right? And these were not, some of these were just calls about, like, okay, what is this helpline, etc. But a lot of them were actually intended to harass the person who took the call, who was a woman, and who had been trained to actually give guidance and counseling. So, it resulted in exactly the same kind of situation that Kavita is talking about, which is that you wake up in the morning, you sort of get these calls, you're trying to solve something, but instead you suddenly start facing the problem yourself, right? And it's just a huge range of comments, including, oh, I want to do a video call with you, can you get me a woman from somewhere, right? Things that are totally not the purpose of the helpline, as is very, very obvious. So the 5 women who actually staff the helpline really experienced, and they're all from grassroots communities, because we wanted to actually try and really, work with grassroots communities in Hindi to begin with. All of them really started feeling exactly what Kavita and Ismat described, right? Like rage, frustration, anger, real reluctance to actually even pick up that phone, which is like retreat from that sphere. That real sort of dread of what am I going to hear when I pick up the phone. And so this has become actually an ongoing issue for us that we are trying to deal with on a daily basis. And I think it just speaks, frankly, to the sense of entitlement that patriarchy gives men, right? Who feel absolutely entitled to do whatever they want with women's speech, expression, bodies, services meant for women, etc. So this is something, I mean, we're honestly struggling with it. And, we'll talk a little later about some of the things that we've done. But one of the things we've also found is that many of the people who called us earlier when we were testing this were actually from grassroots communities and talked about invisible forms of harassment, which they face on a daily basis. And this is really the blank call phenomenon, right? So a young woman in a low income, rural or urban community suddenly starts, it's not only low income communities actually, suddenly starts getting repeated blank calls from this phone number. She is very, very reluctant to tell her parents or family members about this, because in any case, they have indicated to her that digital spaces or technologies are not for her, and that she's being given conditional access to these either for her education or something of the sort, right? So she's scared that if she complains to them, they are then going to basically take away her digital devices, or they're going to blame her and say, what did you do to provoke this set of blank calls? And I think, the person who receives them realizes after a point of time that these are meant to harass, or the caller speaks up, it's usually a man. And so what happens is that, she basically gets stuck in this situation where she can't talk about it. And just like both the speakers have said earlier, there's a real reluctance to accept this as a valid form of abuse or violence. It actually reminds me of the early days of the struggle to get domestic violence taken seriously. Because again, it was seen as, oh, this is just some family matter. Why don't you all just deal with it among yourselves? And this is kind of the space where we've landed up with digital violence. More so because even though we spend our time on digital devices, that hierarchy still exists. There's just, it's somehow seen as less than, even though we talk so much about mental and emotional health, we are constantly being asked to justify the form of digital harassment and violence by saying, no, it may affect our physical bodies, right? Or it may affect our physical life. So it's never seen as just enough that our mental and emotional health is affected on a day-to-day basis to have to endure this kind of everyday harassment. That's what I wanted to start with.
Thank you, Vishaka. It's fascinating that we are planning, if we were to listen to the tech pros, to go and live in the metaverse now. But we are so far behind even acknowledging what just being online does to everyday women, their mental health, and the discourse. Thank you, all of you, for laying out the parameters we're all forced to operate in, and also to highlight why gender does play a big role here. And this is not to say that harassment doesn't happen of non-binary people, queer people, men, or anybody else. And but especially as we talk about this on Women's Day, again, as I said, I rely on the same crutches of other writers who've talked about. Jane Austen says in Persuasion that I hate to hear you talk about women, all women, as if they were fine ladies instead of rational creatures. And none of us want to be in calm waters all our lives because we just are people and want to express ourselves like everybody else and go about living our lives. And this is what we get. I'm going to ask a question about so the artificial, or at least this world which we have been living with all around the globe since March of 2020, the pandemic, when now we are negotiating everything, these panels are happening across continents. What did that do to the problem of online harassment? And um, uh, did generally the abuse against women is also gendered in terms of body shaming. Kavita mentioned about that, character assassination, rape threats, harassment. But what did this space do? Because now a lot of us, at least, and Vishaka, you can perhaps talk about it a lot more. Also, because there's a big part of the society which was forced to negotiate life online, but then didn't even have access to online. But what did it do? It exacerbated it, or it made it better because we were already we were present in almost every form, and we had to assert ourselves. What did you think it did, Kavita? You're muted.
Yeah, I know, I know. I think that, as I said, I mean, the pandemic put us so many of us online so much of the time that that exposure, of course, was a problem. But I also wanted to just take a second to acknowledge, what Ismat said about this fear that your loved ones have because of how the online harassment might translate into offline harassment. And I think that one of the features of that is also, anything that is making you recognizable. So I knew this from the days when I used to be on television. So after that, I stopped being on television. I mean, not only for my safety reasons, but I think more for mental health reasons and whatever other things. But the point is that even in my absence, because the face would be used by these really toxic, awful channels, so they'd keep beaming that. And inevitably, I'd know that they have beamed my face the previous day, saying some very inflammatory things, because then wherever I would be, whichever part of the country, I would suddenly have people recognizing me and saying something. Not always bad things, but there's always that clutch of fear because you don't know what it's going to actually end up happening. And especially traveling in UP in 2017, I remember, soon after one such exposure, I remember that, yeah, my loved ones were concerned. Now, in the pandemic, again, as I said, I mean, in some way, I feel some sense of, a little sense of space of relief actually, because one is not traveling as much. And so you're able to kind of have a better regulation maybe of one's online life and offline life and all of that, have a little bit more control maybe rather than just having to be at the mercy of these forces. So I can't comment on that, but I just want to add one thing that, when we talk about what things may help, totally see the problem that if you have a helpline phone, then of course these are organized forces, so they are going to, in an organized way, going to, make sure that that doesn't work. But I'm wondering if it is possible at all to have something else, something which is much more much less of a publicly announced thing, but some way in which we are able to, set up something where by word of mouth or whatever, women actually know where they can go for help. Yeah, just wondering out loud. Yeah.
Um, sure, I think that the term which Vishaka used about cyber troops and what you're saying, if people are organized in a way to make things tougher, then they're going to do that for even helplines, etc. So, Ismat, what can you talk a little bit about community support or any kind of counseling or access to services which were made available when you were facing this harassment? And Vishaka has talked about something, launching something, and then also landing up into similar problems. But what kind of legal community support or mental health counseling access you had that perhaps other people can also rely on and talk about that?
Yeah. So I think, Mishi, for me, what happened was I find myself like really privileged that I was able to get access to a lot of things that I know for a fact that a lot of women on that list wouldn't have been able to. The fact that I put it out on social media. When we talk about social media, we sort of we are also this. I mean, the whole subject that we're talking about here, we tend to sort of think of it in a negative way, and also the trolling, the negativity around it makes us feel that it's a very negative space. But in my case, on Twitter, and when I put it out on social media, generally on Instagram and Facebook, the kind of response I got online, people acknowledging that it happened. There were politicians who there were immediately the minister had to respond to the tweet that I had put out. So that is in a way sort of the power that social media has in today's time and age. And I think it is the same social media that also sort of required solidarity and support that I needed to that and I also needed to sort of be actively involved in seeking a solution and getting the culprits caught. So I think for me, this solidarity around that time was something that I knew that it existed. I knew that when somebody was going through something, you dropped a message. But I, for the first time, I think I realized the importance of each and every message that we send, and what kind of an impact that it has over people. At the same time, I think the other side to it is the negative impact that it has. As I said before, uh, the physical sort of dangers that I talked about as a journalist, when you go out in the field, there's always a danger that so this happened once. In fact, I was asking a question to a family who was accused of honor killing. So they were accused of killing their own daughter, and I asked them a question, and they got very uncomfortable with that question. And minutes later, people were holding slippers, and they were telling me to get out of that village. They were like literally chasing me out of that village. So one wrong question at the wrong place can actually get you attacked, physically attacked. So that fear is always there. But the fact that when you're going out, you risk yourself, but then you come back, and then you are, unless we're talking about stalking, otherwise in other cases you just feel like, okay, that is over, you're back now, you file your report, you go back to your work. But I think with digital trolling, it also impacts you in a much longer, much sustained way. So yeah, I think these kind of spaces, the most important thing that I would really like to point out is that solidarity is really, really, really important. The space that we also need is to really heal from all the things that have happened, that have the fear that women live with perpetually, the fear of going into public transport, for example. That was a big fear in my life as a teenager, because I was always afraid that something girl will attack me, assault me. So yeah, I think the kind of damage it does to one's psyche, the kind of fear, the paranoia that you live with, all of that needs to be healed also as a collective. As women, we all need to find spaces to heal each other, heal ourselves, and organizations, these kind of conversations, I think, are a really good way of doing that.
Thank you, Ismat. Vishakha, Ismat has talked about, in fact, recognizing the privilege she has as a journalist, but also the problems which the profession itself brings. And you have yourself worked in the space, but you also work from a much a different. Your experiences are from different layers of the society. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about things which are in our blind spot?
Sure, let me give it a shot. I think, maybe going back to the question that you were asking earlier, Mishi, about the last 2 years and the pandemic and what has that meant in terms of digital harassment, has it gone up, etc. I think two really interesting things. One is that there's been a lot of talk of the shadow pandemic, right? Which is the kind of violence that women or trans persons or non-binary persons have experienced as we all sat in our houses. And what's very interesting is that when we were sitting in our houses, our main form of interaction, communication, etc., was essentially digital devices, right? Laptops, phones, etc. But somehow the shadow pandemic is always conceptualized as physical forms of violence, even as people informally reported facing many different kinds of violence and abuse through digital technologies at home, right? For example, we've interviewed queer people who've said that they left their phone. Since you're sitting at home all the time, your phone is with you. You might go to the toilet or something of the sort, and somebody suddenly looks at the photographs on your phone and realizes that you're queer and you may not have come out to your family. That then results in you being outed to your family through your phone, and then you facing further sort of harassment in the family, as well as stigma, and non-acceptance, etc. But a very complicated moment because you can't leave the home. So, Ismat was talking about solidarity. I think for marginalized communities, solidarity is absolutely key. And so in cases like this, when queer people couldn't leave home, they could only communicate with other communities, and of solidarity through their phones. But in situations like this, again, their phones may have been taken away, their access may have been shut down. And similarly, I want to also talk about sex workers who, obviously, in a situation where touch is stigmatized, physical sex work came to a halt, which led to like huge livelihood crisis for many, many sex workers across the country. There again, there were situations where, they reluctantly, with very little preparation, at some moment started using mobile phones to earn a livelihood, performing for clients, etc. And there again, there were many issues that we don't always think about. For example, clients taking screenshots or taking photographs, trying to blackmail them or coerce them into having sex with them without paying them, right? So a lot of things actually came to the fore that we hadn't seen before. And I think that going forward, very honestly, we will be a hybrid world, right? We will be a phygital world, physical and digital. And we need to really think about sort of the connection between both and how we can really think about different kinds of stigma, discrimination, violence, forms that are more visible, more extreme, as well as day-to-day kind of forms of digital violence, things that are more invisible. These are sort of some of the things that I'm thinking about now.
Thank you, ladies. One thing which I'm quite fascinated with is this thing about when something happens, whether it is family or friends, the idea is, which is victim shaming, which happens when physical violence happens as well to us. But it's also about to ask the woman to cede that space, leave that space, don't be here. And, or it must have been your fault. Or as you said, access to online communities is taken away. And I'm wondering that a lot of romantic relationships, personal relationships now are mediated through apps, and and that can result into a variety of other complicated matters. And and how does that impact women differently from men? I know that an uncomfortable opinion, or at least an unpopular one, is that why did you share these images with somebody? It's your problem. But that's not what, whether it is the younger people who have grown up online, or even others who have found the freedom to look for people online, to find friends or just to find companions, look at it when things are going right. Does it impact women differently, and how does that actually affect the personal lives of various people? Any of you who want to address it before I put you on the spot,
I can go, Mishi.
please.
Okay. So actually, this is something that I feel quite strongly about because I feel like, the internet has its own language and its own grammar, and images today are like words, to be honest, right? And I feel like this is just like women are constantly being told not to do certain things for our own good, apparently. What's called protectionism, which is curb your freedoms and somehow it will help you. I just don't understand how, to be honest. So, in an offline setting, we are always being told, like, don't wear these clothes, right? Don't go out at night, don't, like, there's a long series of don'ts. And there again, we are basically being asked to cede space, right? To not sort of make our own choices, etc. Right? Our autonomy is being taken away from us. Frankly, it's the exact same thinking coming online, but being expressed now not so much through clothes as through images. It's again that you like don't express yourself fully. That's basically the first thing. I think the second thing is a real discomfort around sexuality, right? A real discomfort around women expressing themselves. We've had situations in workshops where rural women have taken selfies of themselves without their pallu covering their head, have gone back home, and literally had. There was one case where this woman's husband basically, she proudly showed him her image, and he snatched the phone from her and basically just flung it across the room and broke it. So, to sort of show that she couldn't represent herself freely or how she wanted, right? And we're seeing this pretty much across the spectrum. If you go to the cops and it's a non consensual, intimate image issue, the cops are going to basically blame you and say, why did you share your images with this guy in the first place? But that cannot be the solution. The solution cannot be taking away all your means of expression, putting you in some sort of cage, right? And then saying this is the way in which you will participate. And this kind of thinking is echoed very much, pretty much across society. So even something like sexting, which is really a means of communication today, right, online, is still seen as something that is dirty, shameful, etc. And this is connected with attitudes to sex and sexuality.
Kavita, I'm going to come to you and ask a little bit about organized harassment, which now also comes from this proxies who perhaps are funded by political parties and those in power in various places. And they're mostly about, we used to think that they were about political opinions, and if you were in you had a different opinion, that things would be targeted. But now it seems everything is fair game, from their perspective, whether it is our religion or our appearance or anything else. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
No, I think it is political, Mishi. I don't think that this organized kind of violence, and let's name it, it's basically in India Hindu supremacist violence, and it's very much organized. And it involves both real persons as well as bots and all kinds of technology, which has recently been exposed by this story in The Wire, which has followed very carefully how technology has been used to target women online, right? And so the targets for this violence are selected based on either their ideology or their identity. So it's really, Muslim women are picked for their identity, some Christian women are picked for their identity, and some are picked for both identity and perceived ideology. So if you're a journalist and you are not subscribe, you are not a basically propagandist for the government, then you are included as ideologically hostile, whatever your, whether or not you actually express your ideology online. Um, that's what is happening. And I think that there is no recognition, very, very little recognition of this problem. And this problem certainly spills over from online to offline because these people are, I mean, the ones who are doing this, I mean, first of all, that kind of targeting has real life effects. It has effects on mental health. It has real life effects on if your family gets to know, then what kind of, restrictions might be placed or how that might affect your life. But quite apart from that, I also think that, we can't forget the kind of assassination of Gauri Lankesh and things like that. So this is a murky world where both offline and online are quite close to each other. And I think that basically the assumption that I have criticized nearly every political party that is there in India. Okay, I think there might be hardly any party that has been in government, even those that have not been in government but have expressed views on so many on policy issues. I've engaged, I've criticized, and quite sharply, quite harshly many a time. I have never faced that kind of organized violence that I have done at the hands of the supporters of the Prime Minister or the BJP. No way, certainly not. So there may be other kinds, which I wouldn't even call it trolling. So okay, there is a lot of supporters who of a particular party. So if it's the supporters of Aam Aadmi Party or whatever, and they descend on you for a bit like a swarm and start, putting forward their talking points and are trying to say, no, you got it wrong. This isn't a racial attack. This is this. I'm defending my minister, whatever. But it isn't this kind of targeting which is meant to cause a sense of a very personal loss of self-worth and attacking basically your identity, your self, right? Your looks and so on and so forth. Women in political life do face this in real life, yes, as well as online. So if you're a political figure, a woman, and you're a public figure, yes. So especially Dalit women, somebody like Mayawati, I think the kind of violence violence which has been shown to her both in real life as well as in digital life, and it still is. Even someone like Mamta Banerjee, the kind of language which is used, it's very particularly gendered language, right? So I'm thinking about, when we are going to arrive at a point where at least this can be acknowledged as something for which there isn't this kind of laid back tolerance, where you're not told that it's really okay for this to be happening. You chose to be in the kitchen, so you've got to take the heat, etc. And I just wanted to add to the previous point that you mentioned, about women during the pandemic. Well, also queer people during the pandemic, the same kinds of issues as other speakers have mentioned. So several such incidents have come to light. People have gotten in touch during the pandemic, hoping for help and advice on this. Yeah.
Ismat, um, would you want to weigh in about this erasing women little at a time and sometimes all at once? It's also about this space. I feel that in India, it is very hard to even claim physical space, to be able to freely walk on the streets and not being made comfortable happens a lot of times. You did talk about talking in traveling in public transport in India, but there are these other this thing about expressing oneself, and for a lot of us, everything is political in a lot of ways. Life is political, and what does it do to how you see it, not only as a journalist but as a young person living your life online?
Sorry, Mishi, can you repeat the question, please?
So I was just saying that if you wanted to weigh mostly about as a journalist, as a young person living online, and what this kind of harassment and organized trolling does to a person, and then why they're forced to just cede that space. It's the same thing as I was saying, that in the physical space, one finds it very hard to just walk on the streets and not being made uncomfortable. And now
Hmm.
online, it seems it gets worse, and it's still fair game, and everybody tells you, well, like Kavita said, you're in you decided to be in the kitchen, so you must face the heat. How do you address those arguments, and what does that do actually to your everyday work and existence?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I think starting from what you said about how spaces, even in the physical world, are not very conducive to women being there. For example, you look at any of these public spaces, including parks, including chai tapris, including all these local hotels. Like it's all dominated by men, and I think for women to actually go out and get that same, like, to enjoy themselves, it's a much more expensive affair. You have to actually go sit in a cafe, look at whether how, like, you have to pay money to be able to enjoy the same things that men would probably enjoy for free or for a much lesser sort of cost. So I think that's there. And talking about trolling, for me, with me, what happens is, for me, my, like, it's not, I don't deal with like an organized trolling on an everyday basis. I deal with a kind of trolling from report to report basis. So every time my report comes out, so I start getting messages, I start getting tweets which are very sexually colored and which are very lewd sometimes. And then there are people who after reading every report, they will send me mails with a list of abuses and with a list of things that that are very hurtful to even read. But that's there, it's there. So ultimately, what you do is you end up either censoring yourself, either you stop sharing your report, you sort of think, yeah, isko thoda, let's make it let's sort of make it sound a little softer, or let's not make it very harsh, because of this kind of trolling. So either you end up self censoring, like a lot of us do, or in the case of younger and more vulnerable women, they end up losing that space, losing that social media presence that they have, which they probably use to express themselves, perhaps because they do not have that kind of space in their families or in the places that they live in. So I think yeah, that is
So
all.
this is obviously speaks to the complexity and the scale of the problem, but also my failure as a moderator to actually get to the point of how are we going to create this safety net. We at sflc.in have been studying, because we do research and doing advocacy in terms of working with the platform companies, whether it is Facebook, whether it is Twitter, or various other platforms which people use, in order to make it easy for people to report, to get information. And also, SFLC runs digital security trainings, which is like self defense courses. Prepare yourselves how you can be safe online. Because although we would like a lot more from the community, from the society, from laws right now, but until that happens, we need to arm ourselves. Let's spend just a few minutes to talk about how are we going to create this safety net. I would say the blocking, muting, and slaying them should be used obviously liberally. And as a lawyer who's practiced in this, and we are also running something like what Vishaka already talked about to provide legal support, we see that laws are enough. There are enough laws on the books. It's about how the law enforcement agencies deal with those laws, how easy it is for anybody to not make the process a punishment for the victim themselves. But in view of what our existing conditions are, how are we going to create that safety net? And we've talked about community and solidarity, but actually, if tomorrow somebody who does not have your wherewithal or your might, how does that person react? So I'm going to start with Kavita, Ismat, and then Vishakha, and then perhaps we'll wrap it up. I understand that we might be running a little bit over time.
I think one of the easier things that can be done is to not think in terms of police and punishment and so on, because that's a pretty much rare thing in a far cry. For even for myself, I can say this from experience. Okay, so I think that perhaps one of the easier, within reach things, lower hanging fruit, is that some way in which we can acknowledge and affirm that that person has faced this violence. So that actually has a huge impact. So even if we could have some kind of online campaign also about how to respond when someone has faced this thing or talks about it and so on, right? Basically, this barrage of messages which are saying, ignore it, or oh, it's nothing, and all of that, and basically telling you how to deal with it rather than respecting your process and telling you, oh, it's nothing, it's just political, or it's nothing. So, some form of affirmation and acknowledgement that this is harmful. If we could at least agree on that and at least agree on a way in which that can be expressed, maybe some kind of, on regular online documentation. So if we could set up, say, a website where, or some way, I don't know how this works technologically, but some way in which we could report and record at least some of the messages that bother us more. And we don't expect anything more on that in terms of follow up, except that it is, it's there somewhere for somebody to access. If a researcher wants to access it, and every month maybe a little report is put out to give some idea that, these many things were reported to us, and these are the forms of violence that were expressed. Just a sense of acknowledgement that this is a harm, and you're not expected to just spend so much of your energy persuading people that this is a harm, and that all of us are not made of steel, we are not made of iron, we don't have to deal with it in a continuously very dignified way. Come on, we are allowed to be upset by upset by it sometimes. Doesn't matter who we are, right? So all of that, I mean, I would say that that may be something which is actually achievable. Yeah.
Thank you, Kavita. Vishakha?
Yeah, thanks. Kavita, I agree with you 100%. And this is actually something that we had also been thinking about and talking about, and maybe we can take it forward at some time. I totally agree. You don't have, the assumption cannot be that we have to grow a rhinoceros hide to be online, right? Like we should be able to be there just in a silky skin if we want to. But so taking it seriously is first and foremost key. I think the second thing is we've also been thinking about, how with offline violence, so many women's groups, feminist groups have tied alternative forms like Nari Adalats, etc. What can we learn from that? Maybe we can set up a website where we report cases which platforms have sort of not done anything about, and have a group of people who actually acknowledge, talk about those cases, pretty much what Kavita was saying. I think the other two things I would love to see is one, when we think about platforms, we really need phone companies to set up some reporting system, because we are seeing that a lot of the complaints are around phone calls, right? And these are also digital devices. So it can't be just social media platforms, it has to be telcos. And finally, Mishi, and I hope this is an idea that we can actually talk about a little more. How do we look at civil laws? Is this something that we can bring into the mix? Maybe this is something we could work on together.
Great, thank you. Ismat had to leave because we're anyway over time, and my apologies, I exceeded. To Vishaka's point, I think one of the things is that over reliance on legal centric approaches may come at the cost of collaterally impacting legitimate and permissible free speech. And that makes it essential to emphasize the non state responses to the issues. And that's when you say about civil responses. The problem, one thing which I have a lawyer who practices in the US as well as in India has seen a very big thing. India loves using criminal punishment for almost everything and does not emphasize as much on damages, monetary damages, and civil wrongs which can actually produce monetary damages. It is a thing, from my perspective, should be considered all across, unless, for example, if you're running a business, everything shouldn't always lead up to jail time, especially because the law enforcement agencies don't have the capacity right now or the ability to handle even matters in this main sophisticated way one expects criminal investigations actually to be carried out. And I am completely on board with what both of you said, in terms of the emphasis usually is on the big platform companies who are definitely failing, but at least trying. But there are other players also who really need to be held accountable for that. I will say this has been great. This for us, the day itself is a reminder to think more for us about what it means to be a woman in our various societies, and also the desire to celebrate obviously the achievements in the misogynistic world, but also an opportunity to think why a lot of those opportunities are denied to us purely based on gender. I think every woman who appears and wrestles with the forces that would have her disappear is telling something to everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Vishaka has already been working on a variety of things, and SFLC has been collaborating with her. And Kavita, for all the work you've been doing in this, whether it is anti-rape or other things, and Ismat, who does work as journalist but is also as the receiving end. I do think that it is incumbent more on people like yourselves and us to be able to ensure that although we don't have to be always reasonable, don't have to have that thick skin, but at least because we've been doing it for so long, to just encourage that persistence and doing it together will result in more progress than what it seems when somebody faces that kind of harassment. So thank you for doing the work you are already doing in this area, as well as various other areas. Thank you again for being in the community, and also joining us today and sparing 9 more minutes from what was earlier scheduled, and excusing my bad job as not getting to the actual questions in time.
Please.
But this is very
No, you were
enjoyable.
great.
Thank you very much for joining. And thank you to the entire
Absolutely.
SFLC.in team for putting this together as well.
Thank you so much. You were fantastic,
Thank
Mishi.
you, Mishi. You were great. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Have a lovely evening, and I still have a full Women's Day to go because it is only 8:39 from where I am. And hopefully, when next time we talk, we can talk more about the progress we have made. And as I would say that, as Margaret Atwood would say, don't let the bastards grind us down. So, marchons les enfants.
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody.
Bye
Thanks.
all. Bye everyone. It was great
Thanks,
being with all of
Maithili.
you. Yeah.